The cry of the newborn baby filled the hospital corridor with joy. Vanessa had delivered a healthy baby girl. Family members erupted into celebration. Tears of happiness flowed freely. The wives hugged one another. The brothers laughed and thanked God. Even doctors and nurses smiled at the emotional scene unfolding before them. Yet amidst the celebration, tragedy had already begun. Chief Raymond Okafor collapsed against his chair. A violent pain gripped his chest. His breathing became shallow. Sweat covered his forehead. Barrister Samuel Obi immediately noticed. "Chief!" The lawyer rushed toward him. Several relatives turned and froze. For the first time in their lives, they saw the mighty billionaire looking weak and helpless. Within seconds, doctors hurried from the maternity ward to attend to him. They checked his pulse, attached monitoring equipment, administered emergency medication. Nothing seemed to help. Raymond knew why. This was not a sickness. This was payment. The covenant had reached its conclusion. As medical personnel worked desperately around him, Raymond raised a trembling hand. "Vanessa!" His voice was barely audible. Someone immediately went to bring her. Despite her exhaustion, Vanessa insisted on seeing her father. Moments later, she was wheeled into the corridor, holding her newborn daughter. The sight brought tears to Raymond's eyes. For a moment, he forgot the pain. The baby looked peaceful, innocent, beautiful, a life untouched by the darkness that had followed him for decades. Vanessa moved closer. "Dad!" Raymond reached out and gently touched the baby's tiny hand. A faint smile appeared on his face. "My granddaughter." Vanessa's tears began flowing. "Please don't leave us." Raymond looked at her lovingly. "My daughter, forgive me." She frowned. "For what?" The billionaire struggled to breathe. "For the secrets." Confusion filled her eyes, but before she could ask another question, Raymond looked toward Barrister Samuel. The lawyer immediately understood. "The letter," Raymond whispered. Samuel nodded. "I will do exactly as you instructed." Relief appeared on Raymond's face. Then he looked at all three wives, one after another, then at his sons, the children he had spent his entire life protecting. "My family," he said weakly, "stay together." Everyone cried. No one imagined these would be his final words. A few moments later, the monitor beside him began producing a continuous tone. Doctors sprang into action. Nurses rushed forward. Attempts were made to revive him, but it was already over. At the exact hour his granddaughter entered the world, Chief Raymond Okafor took his final breath. The billionaire who had conquered poverty, built an empire, and ruled a fortune worth billions was gone. 3 days later, the nation mourned him. Thousands attended his burial. Politicians, business leaders, religious figures, and ordinary citizens gathered to pay their respects. Yet among the grieving crowd stood one man carrying a secret, Barrister Samuel Obi. Inside his briefcase rested the sealed letter Raymond had left behind, a letter containing a truth so shocking that it would soon tear the entire family apart. And after the burial, that truth would finally be revealed. 2 weeks after the burial of Chief Raymond Okafor, the atmosphere inside the once vibrant estate had changed dramatically. The laughter that used to fill the compound had disappeared. The expensive cars still lined the driveway. The magnificent mansions still stood proudly. The businesses continued operating. Yet a strange emptiness hung over everything. For the first time in decades, the family was living without the man who had held them together. On a quiet Saturday morning, Barrister Samuel Obi arrived at the estate carrying a black briefcase. Inside it was the sealed letter Raymond had entrusted to him. The lawyer had waited until after the mourning period, exactly as instructed. Now the time had come. All 3 wives were present. All 9 children attended. Even Vanessa, carrying her newborn daughter, sat quietly among them. The atmosphere became tense as Samuel stood before the family. Your father left instructions that this letter must be read after his burial. Everyone exchanged curious glances. One of Raymond's sons spoke. What is so important that it couldn't be said while he was alive? Samuel sighed. You are about to understand. The room fell silent. Slowly he opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and began reading. To my beloved wives and children. Immediately tears appeared in several eyes. Hearing Raymond's words again felt as though he were still present. If this letter is being read, then I am no longer among you. The room became completely silent. First, know that I loved every one of you beyond anything money could ever buy. Every sacrifice I made was for this family. Several people began crying softly, then the tone of the letter changed. There is a secret I hid from all of you for more than 35 years. Everyone looked at one another. Samuel continued reading. The wealth that transformed my life did not come without a terrible price. Confusion spread across the room. Before any of you were born, I entered into a covenant with a powerful brotherhood. In exchange for wealth, influence, and success, I accepted conditions I was too foolish to fully understand. The wives stared in disbelief. The children looked shocked. Vanessa tightened her grip on her baby. The lawyer's voice trembled slightly as he continued. One condition stated that none of my daughters could ever bear a child. The day one became pregnant, my wealth would begin to disappear. The day a grandchild was born through any daughter, my life would end. Gasps erupted throughout the room. No, one of the wives whispered. Another son jumped to his feet. This is impossible. Samuel raised a hand and continued. Vanessa's pregnancy activated the covenant. The day her daughter was born was the day I was destined to die. The room exploded into confusion. Some cried, some shouted, others simply sat frozen, but the most terrifying part of the letter was still to come. Samuel swallowed hard and turned to the final pages, and as he began reading them, the faces in the room slowly transformed from shock into horror. The room remained silent. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The shocking revelation about Chief Raymond Okafor's death had already shaken the family to its foundation. Yet Barrister Samuel Obi had not reached the end of the letter. His hands trembled as he unfolded the remaining pages. Looking at the expressions around him, he almost wished he could stop reading. Unfortunately, Raymond had left strict instructions. Every word had to be revealed. The lawyer cleared his throat and continued. My beloved family, what you have heard so far is only part of the truth. A wave of fear swept across the room. When I refused to sacrifice Vanessa and chose to protect her, I broke the covenant completely. Vanessa lowered her head and began crying. One of her brothers wrapped an arm around her shoulder. She now understood why her father had acted strangely during her pregnancy. She understood why he had looked at her with both love and sadness during their final conversations. He had known exactly what was coming. Samuel continued. The Grand Master warned me that my death would not be the end of the consequences. The lawyer paused. The room grew colder. The wealth attached to the covenant cannot remain after my departure. One of the wives suddenly stood up. What does that mean? Nobody answered. Samuel continued reading. Within months of my death, the businesses will begin failing. Investments will disappear. Properties will be lost. Opportunities will vanish. The empire I built will slowly collapse. The room erupted. This cannot happen. Our businesses are strong. We have professional managers. The companies are worth billions. Voices filled the hall. Samuel raised his hand. There is more. Silence returned. My children, if you are hearing this, then the process has already begun. Everyone froze, because deep down they knew it was true. Several businesses had already reported unusual losses. Important contracts had mysteriously disappeared. Unexpected legal disputes had emerged. At the time, they had assumed these were ordinary business problems. Now they seemed like warnings. Samuel continued, "You will try to save the empire. You will hire experts. You will invest more money. You will fight to keep what remains. But the covenant will consume everything connected to it." Tears streamed down the faces of the wives. The sons looked terrified. Then came the final revelation. The collapse will create division among you. Greed will replace unity. Trust will become suspicion. Brothers will become enemies. Your greatest battle will not be poverty. Your greatest battle will be each other. A painful silence followed. The lawyer slowly folded the letter. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. For the first time since Raymond's death, they realized that his greatest fear had never been losing money. It had been losing his family. Outside the mansion, dark clouds gathered above the estate. And although none of them knew it yet, the first signs of destruction had already begun. Within a few weeks, accusations would start. Within a few months, properties would be sold. And before the year ended, blood would be spilled between brothers who once loved each other. The curse had survived Raymond, and it was coming for the rest of them. At first, the family tried to ignore the warning contained in Raymond Okafor's final letter. After all, they were still rich. The fuel stations were operating. The schools remained open. The factories continued production. Millions still flowed through company accounts every month. To many of the children, the prediction sounded impossible. How could an empire worth billions suddenly disappear? Surely their father had exaggerated. Surely fear had clouded his judgment. Unfortunately, reality began proving otherwise. Only 3 months after Raymond's death, serious problems emerged across multiple businesses. Several long-term contracts were unexpectedly terminated. Foreign investors withdrew from important projects. Government approvals that had once arrived effortlessly became difficult to obtain. Court cases suddenly appeared against some of the companies. The family spent enormous sums fighting legal battles, yet the problems only multiplied. Then the arguments began. The first dispute seemed minor. One of Raymond's sons, Kenneth, accused another brother, Victor, of withdrawing money from a company account without authorization. Victor denied the accusation. Harsh words were exchanged. For the first time in their lives, the brothers nearly came to blows. The matter was eventually settled, but the trust between them was damaged. Soon another disagreement followed, then another, and another. Within months, family meetings that once ended with laughter became battlefields filled with accusations. The 3 wives, who had lived peacefully for decades under Raymond's leadership, also found themselves taking sides. Old resentments that had remained buried for years slowly surfaced. Every misunderstanding became a major conflict. Every financial decision triggered arguments. Every loss created fresh suspicion. The unity Raymond had carefully built over decades was crumbling before their eyes. Meanwhile, Vanessa lived with constant guilt. Although nobody blamed her openly, she could not forget the letter. She could not forget that her daughter's birth had coincided with her father's death. Many nights she cried herself to sleep. Daniel, now her husband, despite Raymond's earlier objections, tried to comfort her. But the burden remained. Then came the day that changed everything. One of Raymond's oldest companies declared bankruptcy. The announcement shocked the business world. People who once admired the Okafor empire began questioning whether the family could survive without its founder. Panic spread. Several family members demanded that assets be sold immediately before more losses occurred. Others strongly disagreed. The resulting argument became so heated that security guards had to intervene. What had once been a united family now looked like strangers fighting over scraps. And this was only the beginning. Because while they argued about money, another tragedy was quietly approaching. A tragedy that would soon claim the life of one of Raymond's sons. And after that death, the family's descent into chaos would become unstoppable. 6 months after the death of Chief Raymond Okafor, the empire he had spent a lifetime building was falling apart faster than anyone had imagined. Businesses continued to fail. Properties lost value. Investments vanished. The family members who once traveled in private jets were now meeting constantly with lawyers, accountants, and creditors. Yet the greatest damage was not financial. It was emotional. The love that once united the household had been replaced by distrust. Every conversation became an argument. Every gathering ended in bitterness. Among Raymond's sons, Kenneth was affected the most. As the oldest child, many people expected him to step into his father's position and restore order. Instead, he found himself overwhelmed by problems. The pressure became unbearable. Creditors called him day and night. Business partners demanded answers. Employees wanted salaries. Family members blamed him whenever another company suffered losses. Gradually, Kenneth changed. The confident man who once carried himself with pride became anxious and aggressive. He hardly slept. He barely ate. Friends noticed the difference. Even his wife pleaded with him to slow down, but Kenneth refused. "I have to save Father's empire," he would say. Unfortunately, the empire no longer wanted saving. One evening, Kenneth received information about a businessman willing to purchase one of the family's struggling companies. The deal promised millions. Desperate for a solution, he arranged a meeting immediately. Ignoring warnings from relatives, he drove alone to a neighboring city. Hours later, disaster struck. While traveling along a lonely highway during heavy rain, Kenneth's vehicle lost control. Witnesses later claimed the accident made no sense. The road was wet, but not dangerous. His car was new and properly maintained. Yet somehow, it veered off the road and crashed violently into a concrete barrier. By the time emergency responders arrived, Kenneth was dead. The news shattered the family. His mother collapsed upon hearing it. His brothers rushed to the hospital in disbelief. Even people outside the family mourned him. The funeral attracted hundreds of mourners. But amid the tears and condolences, fear began spreading. Some family members remembered Raymond's letter. Some recalled the warning about blood being spilled between brothers. Others spoke quietly about the curse. No one wanted to admit it. Yet many were beginning to believe it. After Kenneth's burial, the atmosphere inside the estate became darker than ever. And before the family could recover from their grief, another shocking event occurred. One morning, millions of naira disappeared from a company account. Fingerprints pointed toward another son. Accusations exploded. Fists were raised. Threats were exchanged. What started as a financial dispute would soon lead to another death. And this time, the enemy would come from within the family itself. The death of Kenneth marked the beginning of the end for the Okafor family. The grief from his burial had barely settled when another crisis erupted. Millions of naira had vanished from one of the remaining company accounts. Evidence pointed toward Victor, one of Raymond's sons. Victor swore he was innocent, but nobody wanted to listen. Years earlier, such an accusation would have been investigated calmly. Now, anger ruled everything. Family meetings turned into shouting matches. Lawyers became involved. Brothers stopped speaking to one another. The three wives, once united by Raymond's wisdom, formed separate camps and defended their own children. The estate that had once felt like paradise became a battlefield. One evening, a heated confrontation broke out between Victor and another brother, Michael, whose mother believed Victor had stolen the money. Harsh words became threats. Threats became violence. In the struggle that followed, Michael fell from a staircase and struck his head. He was rushed to the hospital. 3 days later, he died. The tragedy destroyed whatever remained of the family's unity. Two sons from different mothers were now dead. The police investigated, but the emotional damage could never be repaired. Within the next 2 years, the empire completely collapsed. Fuel stations were sold, factories closed, schools were taken over by creditors, luxury mansions were auctioned, expensive cars disappeared one after another. The family that once possessed unimaginable wealth found themselves fighting simply to survive. Some moved into rented apartments, others depended on friends for financial assistance. A few searched desperately for jobs. People who once commanded respect wherever they went now stood in queues seeking help. Ironically, it was not poor management that destroyed them. Many of Raymond's children were educated and capable. The downfall came because the covenant attached to the fortune was consuming everything connected to it, exactly as Raymond had warned. Years later, Vanessa often visited her father's grave with her daughter. One quiet afternoon, as she sat beside the tombstone, she opened a small notebook containing the final words from Raymond's letter. True wealth is not money. True wealth is peace, love, integrity, and the freedom to sleep without fear. For a long time, she stared at those words. Then she finally understood. Her father had gained billions but spent decades living in fear. In the end, he willingly surrendered his wealth and his life to save the child he loved. And although the empire had vanished, that final act of love became the greatest inheritance he left behind. The riches disappeared, the mansions disappeared, the companies disappeared, but the lesson remained. Some prices are too high for wealth, and some sacrifices are worth more than an empire.